I'm Sharbani Punde, the PhD student at Georgia Tech. I'll be presenting our paper towards measuring the effectiveness of Telephony Blacklist. This was a joint research done with Roberto Perdici from University of Georgia and Georgia Tech, my advisor Mursak Ahmed, and Pius Gupta from Pendrop. I guess everyone in this room has, just one second, do you want me to do the introduction again? Has everyone heard it? Okay, I guess I'll continue. I guess everyone in this room has got a spam or scam call at least once in their life. It could be a fake IRS agent claiming that you owe debt to the federal government, or it could be someone saying that you won a free cruise or that your laptop has been infected with a virus. We've all got calls like that. Just in 2017, there were more than 3 million user reports complaining about these spam calls to FTC or different online forums like 800 Notes or Mr. Number. Now, there are call blocking applications like Umail and Truecaller that claim to block your phone calls, but they do not actually release any public information about how they build their blacklist or what data sources do they use to build their blacklist, and how good actually is their blacklist, how effective is their applications in blocking future unwanted calls. Therefore, in this work, we systematically study the multiple data sources that can be leveraged to build such a blacklist, and how can we evaluate them to see how they are able to block unwanted future calls. We have selected 4 data sources for building our blacklist. The first one is FTC. The first one is FTC. So FTC provides a public platform where users can go in and report complaints about these spam or scam calls. However, they do not release any information about what the content of the call was or who complained. They just release information about what number the complaint was about. The second one is the COC dataset, which is the crowdsourced online complaints. So these dataset is collected from online forums like 800 Notes and Mr. Numbers, where users can go in and actually type in comments about phone numbers that they got calls from. So this actually gives you the content of the call, which is a user's perspective of the call, and you also know the number about which the complaint was made about. The second 2 data sets are data sets collected from Telephony honeypot. So this Telephony honeypot was established by a company, Pendrop, so we collected the data from them. So in the honeypot, they have a set of dirty phone numbers, meaning that these phone numbers were given up by their previous owners because they were getting a lot of scam calls. So the honeypot consists of all these phone numbers and can keep a track of all the calls coming to the honeypot. The first one is CDR dataset, which is actually the metadata of the call. So you know who called, to whom the call was made, and the time of the call. However, you do not know the content of the call. Now, a subset of these calls coming to the honeypot were selected for recordings. So whenever a call was selected for recording, the system would pick the phone up and say hello, and whatever was spoken on the other end was recorded, and then the recording was transcribed using CalD. So you can actually know the content of the call. Plus, you also know who made the call, to whom the call was made, and the timestamp of the call. Now, FTC and CDR are context-less data set, meaning that they do not provide you any content about the call. You don't know what the call was about. However, COC and HCD are data sets which are context-rich, so you know what the call was about. To the best of our knowledge, we are the first ones to provide a systematic study on how to leverage multiple data sources to build phone blacklists. We investigate a number of different approaches to build phone blacklists for them. Since these are different data sources, we have to treat them differently to build a blacklist from them. And we were able to show that these blacklists were able to block more than 55% of future unwanted calls. And we have also used a combination of unsupervised learning techniques to identify the top running campaigns, their behavior, and their trends over time. This is a brief summary of the data sets we collected. So from FTC, we have collected more than 1.5 million of user reports. From CDR, we have about more than 1 million metadata of the calls coming to the honeypot. For the user comments, we have about 600,000 online comments from the users, and from the HCD, we have about 20,000 recordings of the calls. Now, collecting ground truth in this case is difficult because there is no one single authority that can provide you with a whitelist or a blacklist, which can give you a definite definition that these phone numbers are good, these phone numbers are bad. So therefore, we used a conservative approach in determining how we label our phone numbers. So we use third-party providers like Umail and Truecaller to determine whether they have labeled a phone number as spam or scam. Since these applications are used by a lot of users and they're in market, so we assume that the label they provide should be good enough. We have also used white pages to perform reverse lookup queries to get more insight about the phone numbers in our blacklist. Besides, to get a whitelist of the phone number, we have collected phone numbers from yellow pages to get a list of legitimate phone numbers. And we also call back a subset of the phone numbers. Now, we only call back the phone numbers that have left a message asking to be called back, and we only reached IVR systems, so we did not reach any actual human being when we called back these numbers. This is the system overview of our whole work. During the data collection process, I talked about 4 data sets, but now you can see there are 5 data sets. So COC-NC is actually the COC data set, but we pretend that we do not have context for this. So NC stands for no context. We just kept this for comparison purposes to see how they work when there is no context. So we have these 5 data sources, and now these data sources may contain noise. They have limited information. And to filter out the noise, we filter out the low volume phone numbers during the data pre-processing step. And we have 5 different approaches to build a blacklist from these data sets, and I'll explain this in detail later. And then we get 5 different blacklists from all these 5 different data sources, and we evaluate them separately to see how they are effective in blocking unwanted future calls. Let's start with context-less blacklisting. So we know that CDR and FTC, COC, NC are context-less, so we don't know the content of the call. We just know the number that had made the call. In some cases, we know to whom the phone call was made to, and we know the timestamp. Now, to build the blacklist from the metadata of the honeypot, which is the CDR, we filter out the low-volume phone numbers, and we calculate a blacklist score. So we use this equation to build the blacklist score for each of the phone number PIs. Here, alpha and beta are tunable parameters, and VOL of PI delta T stands for the volume of calls made by a phone number PI during time delta, and NOD stands for the number of destinations reached by that phone number during that time. So this kind of gives you an idea of how many phone numbers this particular phone number tried to reach and how many times it called. And we calculate this blacklist score for all the phone numbers in the CDR data set, and any phone number that has a blacklist score greater than a predefined threshold is added to the blacklist. Now, building a blacklist from the FTC and COC data set is pretty much straightforward. We filter out the low volume phone numbers just by filtering out phone numbers that had made less than theta C calls, and all the remaining phone numbers are simply added to the blacklist. Now, building a blacklist from the context-rich data set is more involved. Since we know the content of the call, we want to leverage that in identifying the top-running campaigns and their behaviors. So HCD, the transcripts, and COC, the user comments, are context-rich data set. So we filter out the noise by removing stop words, removing punctuations, and things like that. And then we turn them into bag of words, and we calculate the TF-IDF. So in this way, we can actually get a feature vector from each of these transcripts or each of these user comments. Then we perform LSI topic modeling to get the campaigns or get the themes of all these documents. So in our experiments, we chose the number of topics to be 50. So we have 50 different topics from all our transcripts and our user comments. The next slide gives a better explanation. So here are the first 9 topics from our HCD data set. So each topic is represented by a set of keywords. So by looking at these keywords, you can determine what the campaign is about. For example, topic 0 says that it is about Google campaign. The words look like it's from Google campaign. Topic 1 is cruise survey Bahamas, so it's something about free cruise campaign. In the same way, we can see that the rest of the topics can also be labeled as different campaigns. Now, after doing the topic modeling, we label the topics, each of the topics saying that which topic belongs to which campaign, and we group together the phone numbers belonging to these scam campaigns, and all the phone numbers that have been labeled as one of the topics or that are most similar to the topics that are spam campaigns are simply put in the blacklist. Now let's determine how these blacklists are, how effective they are in blocking unwanted future calls. But before that, let's see how these blacklists overlap among themselves. So we can see there's a partial overlap among these blacklists. Now, this kind of argues why we need all these data sources to build our blacklist. Why couldn't we just use one to build a blacklist? So in addition to getting more phone numbers as we use more data sources, there's this another reason. What we noticed is the FTC data source or the online comments data sources, these data sources are reported by users. So the campaigns that we get from there are more user targeted, like free cruise or IRS or tech support campaign. However, the campaigns that we get from the honeypot, now these are more business oriented. And the reason behind this is the phone numbers that are in the honeypot were previously owned by business users. So the campaigns that we get there are more business oriented, like business loan or Google listing campaigns. So this kind of gives an evidence that we need all these data sources to get a better coverage on all the campaigns. Now we measure the call blocking rates by seeing that how effective the blacklists work in blocking future unwanted calls. And we do this by assuming that if this blacklist were deployed, how many of the calls would we have been able to block? So for the CDR, we see that the call blocking rate kind of goes up and down. And the reason behind this is every 7 days, new phone numbers appear, which the blacklist had not seen before, and the call blocking rates drops because it was not seen in the blacklist before, therefore the call was not blocked. However, since our blacklist is updated daily, we include the new phone numbers every day, so the call blocking rate picks up quickly and includes those numbers. This is the same case for COC-NC dataset. We can see a big drop in the COC-NC dataset. Now this was during the tax season time, so there were a lot of IRS campaigns, and these campaigns were using caller ID spoofing. Therefore, the blacklists were not very effective at that time. We have also calculated call blocking rates for different campaigns. I'm showing 2 of them here for free cruise and tech support. For both of them, the call blocking rate goes up and down. However, the average call blocking rate for free cruise is about 84%. For tech support, the blacklist was able to block about 70% of the calls. And whenever new phone numbers have appeared, the call blocking rate of the blacklist would decrease. Now to see how our blacklist compares with the third-party blacklist, now since the third-party blacklist like Umail and Truecaller do not provide any public information, they do not provide us with the list of their own blacklist. So what we did was we took a random sample of about 12,500 phone numbers, and we queried them to Umail to see if they were labeled as blacklist, if they were labeled as spam or scam calls. And we found that about 2.4% of them were labeled as scam. And among this 2.4% phone numbers, 87% of these numbers were found in one or more of our blacklists. So it's pretty safe to say that our blacklist is quite similar to Umail's blacklist. Now we also use White Pages reverse lookup queries to get more insight of these phone numbers in our blacklist. Now most of these numbers were VoIP phone numbers, and previous work have shown that the scammers or the spammers use a lot of VoIP phone numbers to perform their malicious activities. And most of these phone numbers in our blacklist did not have much owner information. And even for the ones that did have owner information, the information was not valid, meaning that the name was not valid, the address was not valid. So it's safe to say that the phone numbers in our blacklist are used for malicious activities. To measure a false positive rate is difficult in this case because there is no one single authority or one single list which gives you a white list of phone numbers or a list of all the legitimate phone numbers. So what we did was we crawled yellow pages and we collected about 100,000 phone numbers from random cities and random businesses, and we checked if any of these phone numbers are in our blacklist. And we found that we have a false positive rate of only 0.01%, meaning that we found only 10 phone numbers that are in yellow pages, which we found in our blacklist. And we looked more into these 10 phone numbers and found that these 10 phone numbers have indeed been complained about by different users in different online forums. And now, the reason behind this is probably these are actually legitimate phone numbers, but however, these numbers were spoofed by scammers or scammers to do their malicious activities. Now, caller ID spoofing is a huge concern in Blacklist. As we saw that as new phone numbers come in, as caller ID spoofing becomes more pervasive, the call blocking rates of the Blacklist would decrease, so the effectiveness of the Blacklist would decrease. However, we saw that not all campaigns aggressively use caller ID spoofing. For example, Free Cruise and Google Listing doesn't use caller ID spoofing that much. The reason may be that they don't need to use caller ID spoofing that much because there are not a lot of call blocking applications, or not a lot of people are using call blocking applications, so they just simply don't need to spoof their phone numbers. Plus, there are several recent initiatives to address caller ID spoofing. For example, FTC has proposed rules that allows carriers to block phone numbers coming that allows carriers to block phone calls coming from unassigned or invalid phone numbers. There are standards like STIR and Shaken from Industry-led Strike Force that also addresses caller ID spoofing. So these initiatives are not in practice currently, but they're working on this, and as this gets in practice and caller ID spoofing would be difficult since caller ID authentication would come in place, and then the effectiveness of Blacklist would increase. To conclude, we were the first ones, to the best of our knowledge, we were the first ones to do a systematic study on how to leverage multiple data sources to build a blacklist. And we used topic modeling to learn the content of the call. We evaluated the correctness of our blacklist, and we showed that our blacklist was able to block more than 50% of the calls. And we identified the top running campaigns, and we looked at their behavior, their trends, how much caller ID spoofing they use, how much a call they make, and in a nutshell, their behavior in time. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Ben Stock from CISPA. Thanks for your talk. I was wondering, can you comment a little bit on the parameters? So you said you have like these weights for the volume and the number of calls, and also the threshold. So maybe comment on how you would predetermine that.
So one parameter we used was alpha and beta when we calculate the blacklist score. So these parameters are given to determine the weight. In our experiments, the value of beta was greater than alpha, since beta was associated with the number of destinations they reach. So we wanted to give more weight to the phone numbers that are reaching a lot of phone numbers. And besides the thresholds like theta C, which are determined to see if a blacklist should be put in the phone numbers, we learn these parameters automatically. We use one-class learning approach to learn these parameters. The details are in the paper.
All right,
so we can, and the thresholds are updated every day. So they learn from the so they learn from the data set, and it is the most current one.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Thanks. I'll look at the paper.
Hi, Soyat from Purdue University. So do you have any plan to release your data set?
The data sets like FTC and COC are already public. FTC releases public information on their data sets. COC is just we crawled the COC data sets from online forums like 800 notes, and Mr. Numbers. If you want, I can give you that. However, the data sets from the honeypot is proprietary because it is collected at a company and they don't want to release it.
Okay, I have a second question. So, did you think about any solution for preventing the caller spoofing call?
Well, we are not actually looking into doing any future work on caller ID authentication, but I know there are a lot of technical papers that are actually working on this, and there are recent initiatives that is coming to real life. So
you might look into the authentic call and authentic loop by
caller ID
Blacklists,
authentication, right? Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem.
Hi, Jonathan Spring, UCL. Thanks. I thought this was nice. What's the relationship between the overlap of like IP address and domain name based blacklists and the overlap on the telephony based blacklists?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question?
So there's some other work on the overlap of IP based blacklists and domain based blacklists, and they overlap different amounts. What's the relationship between the overlap on the telephony based blacklist? Like, do they overlap more or less than blacklists of other identifiers?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say because the resources that we use for our blacklist is much different than the resources used in IP or domain blacklist. We couldn't use those resources. And therefore, and the partial overlap we saw among our blacklist was due to, for example, if a phone number is being it's involved in both user-related campaigns and business-related campaigns. We would see them in all data sources. And a phone number being in more than one data sources means that it is more probably, it is high likely that it's involved in a scam campaign. But I guess I don't know what the relationship between.
Yeah, I mean, it should just be a percentage, so that should be comparable. It's just like those overlap 10%, like domains I think overlap 3%. Like maybe is there some reason?
I can't think of any now. The overlap is, yeah. So the overlap is simply because if a phone number is involved in more scam campaigns or we have a better coverage of them, we see them in multiple data sources. So for example, one phone number can be seen in both FTC and COC. So that means multiple users have gotten calls from that specific phone number. So some of them complain to FTC, some of them complain to 800 nodes. And a phone number that is in an overlap region in FTC and in the honeypot means that that phone number was targeting both users and both businesses. So we saw an overlap between that, yeah. Okay. And there is partial overlap. Since there is partial overlap, it is safe to say that using multiple data sources is necessary.